$2.3 billion. That is the amount that the three largest automakers operating across Canada and the United States are now expecting from the federal U.S. government as reimbursement. These funds represent tariffs that General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis already paid to the U.S. Treasury, tariffs that the Supreme Court declared illegal back in February. Last week, all three companies formally submitted applications to reclaim those payments. Analysts had anticipated this move, and the figures appeared on their first quarter earnings reports released on Wall Street this past Tuesday and Wednesday. Ford sought reimbursement totaling $1.3 billion. General Motors requested approximately $500 million. Stellantis pursued roughly $500 million in equivalent value, expressed in euros. Three Detroit-centered corporations. Three formal requests. $2.3 billion in combined refund claims, all filed within the week following the opening of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection portal on April the 21st. On that very same day, former President Donald Trump appeared in a televised interview and made his stance clear. He suggested that companies filing for these refunds might not earn favorable recognition. His precise words on April 22nd in a phone interview indicated that the smart firms would refrain from filing. He called it brilliant if they abstained. Companies that chose to file, he implied, would come to know him very well. When questioned directly about whether corporate leaders should fear repercussions for pursuing refunds, Trump responded in a tone of self-importance, implying that the question itself was an honor. Just 3 days later, Ford's chief financial officer, Sherry House, addressed investors and described the company's choice to submit a refund claim as a matter of fiduciary responsibility. She emphasized their duty to safeguard shareholder interests and ensure they were positioned to receive the reimbursement. Trump's remarks were not mentioned. His threat was irrelevant to the conversation. The decision had already been finalized. The largest automakers in North America, through the formal language of corporate finance, made it clear that a presidential warning would not factor into balance sheet decisions. This is James Wren reporting. Here's where we unpack the geopolitical and economic maneuvers shaping industries, stripped of embellishment. The significance of this moment goes far beyond the immediate $2.3 billion. This development marks the moment when Donald Trump's influence over U.S. industry lost its grip. If Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis were able to submit $2.3 billion in refund claims within a single week after the president went public with a threat on April 22nd, then every other major American manufacturer in sectors like steel, aluminum, semiconductors, retail, apparel, and electronics now has political cover to follow suit. What Trump issued on April 22nd was an appeal for political loyalty above corporate fiduciary responsibility. The Detroit Big Three responded between April 28th and 30th, using the language of fiduciary duty. 250 additional large importers observing the situation will reach the same conclusion the automakers did. Filing is mandatory, loyalty is optional. Ultimately, the refund pool is set to return $175 billion from the U.S. Treasury to the balance sheets of corporations that paid tariffs later deemed illegal by the Supreme Court. Over the past 14 months, Mark Carney's administration has resisted making preconditions or concessions, navigating demands framed as entry fees, and bypassing the Federal Register on a company-by-company basis. Every escalation from Trump was met in Canada with structural patience, operating under the assumption that the cumulative political and operational costs of the trade war would escalate faster for the Americans than for the Canadians. February's Supreme Court ruling represented the first significant institutional fracture in U.S. tariff policy. The opening of the refund portal on April 21st was the operational consequence. The Detroit Big Three filings between April 22nd and 30th constitute corporate validation. The limited response from the Trump administration, restricted to a single televised interview and a social media complaint, publicly revealed that no enforcement mechanism existed behind the threat. The threat itself is powerless. When ignored, it becomes structurally irrelevant. Mark Carney has relied on this very dynamic. It was never about a specific Supreme Court decision or a particular refund procedure. It is the broader structural pattern where American institutional resistance, corporate fiduciary obligation, and fragmentation within political coalitions converge to render the trade war strategically unsustainable for Washington. $2.3 billion in voluntary corporate refund filings, made against an explicit presidential warning, represents the visible manifestation of this pattern. It is the moment when the structural prediction guiding Carney's negotiating posture for 14 months became empirically confirmed. The North American auto industry operates as an integrated continental system rather than a bilateral political issue. The Detroit Big Three rely on a network where vehicles are assembled in Ontario using Mexican-manufactured parts, finished in Michigan, painted in Ohio, and delivered through ports in British Columbia. This complex structure, developed over 50 years, cannot be dismantled by a single executive order. rerouted by a solitary Federal Register notice or politically realigned through a single televised appearance. While the Detroit Big Three are not Canadian companies by ownership, they depend operationally on Canadian manufacturing. Through their public earnings statements, they communicated to the U.S. President and the Securities and Exchange Commission that the integrated cross-border system takes precedence over political compliance. Stellantis, which owns Chrysler, Jeep, Ram, and Dodge, produces the Chrysler Pacifica minivan at the Windsor Assembly Plant in Windsor, Ontario, employing roughly 4,500 Canadian workers. Components for the Pacifica crossed the Detroit-Windsor border multiple times for each vehicle. When Stellantis announced in October that Jeep Compass production would move from Brampton to Illinois, it did not close the Windsor plant. Pacifica production continues uninterrupted. The $500 million Stellantis refund claim includes tariffs paid on parts moving across the Detroit-Windsor border under the EA framework, which the Supreme Court ruled unlawful. In practical terms, it represents a Canadian-American cross-border manufacturing system seeking reimbursement for tariffs that disrupted its operations. Ford operates the Oakville Assembly Complex in Oakville, Ontario. The plant has been paused for retooling since 2024, originally intended for electric vehicle production. Following Trump's regulatory reversal on EV tax credits, Ford shifted plans to retool for F-Series Super Duty pickup truck production. These Super Duty trucks fall under medium and heavy-duty tariffs activated on November 1st. The $1.3 billion Ford refund claim encompasses tariff payments on cross-border parts shipments that supplied Oakville's retooling supply chain. General Motors runs the Oshawa Assembly Plant in Oshawa, Ontario, producing Chevrolet Silverado and GMC Sierra pickup trucks for Canada. GM planned a reduction of one shift starting in January, while remaining shifts continue. Its $500 million refund application covers tariff payments on parts supplying that adjusted production schedule. 3 Detroit Big Three companies, 3 Ontario assembly plants, 3 refund claims, all submitted during the same week, all filed despite Trump's public threat. All recorded as anticipated income on quarterly earnings reports, as required by the Securities and Exchange Commission. This is the operational reality. These applications are not symbolic political gestures. They are precise corporate accounting decisions made by 3 publicly traded companies whose operations are tightly intertwined with Canadian manufacturing capacity. The refund funds flow through corporate accounting structures encompassing Canadian subsidiaries, payroll, capital expenditures, and production planning, directly linking the reimbursement to Canadian industrial activity. When General Motors adjusted its guidance for 2026, adding $500 million based on anticipated refund receipts, the Detroit strategy team measured that increase against the operational footprint that includes Oshawa. Similarly, when Ford recorded $1.3 billion in expected income, the finance team in Dearborn calculated that figure with Oakville fully in view. Stellantis, booking €400 million in refund value, had its corporate finance team in Auburn Hills measuring the impact against Windsor. In total, the integrated cross-border automotive system gained a $2.3 billion tailwind. This boost reinforces Canadian operations just as much as it supports U.S. operations. While it does not resolve the broader tariff burden facing Canada's auto industry, it provides the cash flow necessary for Canadian plants to continue absorbing remaining tariff costs as the CUSMA negotiations approach the July 1st deadline. In practical terms, Mark Carney now has a 60-day operational window during which the Detroit Big Three are receiving refund funds that shield their Canadian footprint, reducing political pressure from Trump's negotiating tactics. This, in turn, raises the structural cost of any further escalation targeting Canadian auto manufacturing. That is the Canadian dimension, what much of the American media overlooked. And this sets off a domino sequence. Over the past 3 weeks, I've been tracking this chain of events. Lumber was domino 1, dairy domino 2, Alberta domino 3, alcohol domino 4, tourism domino 5, Lutnick's Nuts decision domino 6, Greer's 5 rejected demands domino 7, the cancellation of the Columbia River Treaty domino 8, Canadian medical isotope licensing at Darlington domino 9, Carney's rejection of the entry fee framing domino 10, the Wabkinyu Manitoba LNG corridor announcement domino 11, Canada Strong Fund domino 12, Gordie Howe Bridge standoff, domino 13. Federal Register bypass, domino 14. Shell ARC $22 billion acquisition, domino